With this, we have to move forward to the session 2, which is on LSDGs and inclusion of marginalized sections. For this, I would like to invite on stage the panel speakers, Ms. Sharda Muralidharan, Additional Chief Secretary, Government of Kerala, Ms. Smriti Sharan, Joint Secretary, Rural Livelihoods, Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India, Ms. Yu Hee, Chief of Social Policy, UNICEF India, Mr. Matthew Cherian, Global Ambassador of Aging of Helpage International, Mr. Sushant Verma, Asia Regional Director, Trickle Up, Ms. Ranu Bhogal, Executive Director, Karm Daksh, Ms. Madhu Khetan, Integrator, PRADAN. Madhu will be the moderator of this session. I will just take few more minutes to give a brief introduction about the panel speakers. Talking about Ms. Muralidharan. Ms. Muralidharan's career spanning various pivotal roles in the government and the development sector. Sharda Muralidharan is a seasoned leader known for spearheading transformative initiatives in the domains of women's empowerment, poverty reduction, and social justice. She is currently Additional Chief Secretary to the Government of Kerala. Ms. Sharan is looking after the policy planning and monitoring, international cooperation, and Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Rural-Urban Mission. She has worked as Deputy Director General in the Department of Posts, and currently she is the Joint Secretary in Rural Livelihoods in Ministry of Rural Development, Government of India. Ms. He oversees the social policy, social protection programs, and social policy evidence agenda, including in 14 UNICEF state offices. In collaboration with national, sub-national government and partners, she is spearheading key initiatives that include child, gender, and shock-responsive social protection, public financial management, and child-friendly local governance, as well as SDG localization initiatives. She is currently the Chief of Social Policy in UNICEF India. Mr. Matthew has spent 4 decades in development work in India. He served full-time as Chief Executive of Helpage India for 18 years and now serves on several not-for-profit boards. He is currently the Global Ambassador of Aging of Helpage International. Mr. Verma has over 25 years of intensive experience in managing social development programs, especially in the rural development sector, specializing in the areas such as education, public health, livelihood promotion, community development, disaster management relief, corporate social responsibility, and women empowerment. Currently, he is the Asia Regional Director of Trickle Up. Ms. Bhogal has 30 years of experience on issues related to gender, natural resource management, and sustainable development with a special focus on rural development. She was chosen as one of the 50 women leaders in a study of women leadership in development sector commissioned by Rockefeller Foundation. And last but not the least, Madhu. Madhu is recognized for her pioneering work on gender equality through women collectives, focusing on women's understanding of gender in their everyday lives and catalyzing issues of stereotypes. She is currently leading a partnership with NRLM around strengthening the higher level federated structures of SDGs called cluster level federations for building them as member owned and managed organization contributing to members. And also she is involved in the UN Women funded initiative focused on unleashing women's economic empowerment through multiple pathways of education, employment, and entrepreneurship. With this, I hand over the mic to Madhu, and we will have sharp 1 hour for this session. So we will have 45 minutes for the focused discussion, and to close up this session, we will have another 15 minutes. So yeah, that is a buffer. Yeah.
Thanks, Shikha, for introducing the panelists. Let me begin by thanking all the panelists for the time that they have given. This is a complex issue, and I think has a lot of relevance given the increasing inequality globally, as well as in the country. So I was trying to get some estimates of what is the number, the magnitude of people or households that may be chronic poor or ultra poor, whatever we may call it. But after going through several documents, I kind of gave up, and hoping that the illustrious panel can maybe also cover this among the other questions. But suffice it to say that in all our journey as development professionals, and also organizationally, I know in PRADAN also, we've kind of seen that even after, decades of work which each of us has kind of put in, we will find that in every village there are these, households that seem to be, completely left out of whatever programs that may be happening in the village. We also see that there are specific social groups which are kind of really on the periphery or margins. So the nature of ultra poverty also is kind of varied. I will, without taking up too much time, I would like to move to the panel. I mean, we would, given the limited time, we hope the session will provide, stimulate our interest in the topic of engaging with the ultra poor enough so that more of us get interested. We hope to cover who are the poorest of the poor, what could be possible solutions, how has convergence helped, any policy level changes needed, and all this with also the perspective of localization of SDGs, and therefore the role of Panchayati Raj institutions. So I'll maybe start off with Sushant. Sushant, you've been associated, you had Trickle Up, which has been kind of one of the pioneers of the work around the graduation approach. So please give us a grounds up view of who are the ultra poor and briefly about the graduation approach.
And PRADAN for inviting us. This is a topic, ultra poor, which is not widely discussed or like widely talked, because this is a segment where we feel that today we are talking about localization of like SDG, but we recognize that ending extreme poverty must start with ultra poor. That's what has been our experience, and I'll start with that. Trickle Up is a global organization which works in 28 countries and very difficult countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, Sudan, and Syria. And India, we work in states like Jharkhand, Orissa, West Bengal, and we primarily focus on ultra poor. As we all know that there is no global definition of ultra poor, but we feel that those extreme poor people live on less than $2.1 per day. The ultra poor are the lowest earning and most vulnerable subset of the population globally, what we feel. The marginalized subset of extreme poor often lack access to even basic social safety net or support from government and NGOs. At most of the places all around the world where we work, we hardly see any NGOs or any government services providing them. If you even go to our project area in India, you will meet on the way elephant, wild boars on the way, and you have to walk for 8 hours and 10 hours to reach those villages. So we identify those villages where government has not gone, where other organization has not gone. We feel that ultra-poor and extremely poor communities who suffer from multi-dimensional poverty reside in one of the remotest part of India and remotest part globally. And as I mentioned, that Trickle Up recognizes that ending extreme poverty starts with ultra-poor, and if we have to achieve at least the first SDG, which is no poverty, we have to start with ultra-poor. This multidimensional approach recognizes that the most vulnerable are often trapped in cycle perpetuated by exclusion and discrimination based on gender, social group, disability, and stretching across organizations. So that's why we choose to work with ultra-poor, and I'm very happy to share that we are one of the few organizations who especially work with ultra-poor. But friends, it's not easy to work with ultra-poor. You need the different kind of commitment, different kind of skill set. But anyway, as you have asked about the graduation approach, I'll explain the history of graduation approach. I know we don't have much time. Graduation is not exactly a model, it's an approach, which was started in Bangladesh way back in 2002 by BRAC, and the program was called Targeting the Ultra-Poor. And the journey of graduation approach started from there, and now it's being implemented in more than 50 countries. In India, Usaji is sitting there, Bihar, Jharkhand is the state where graduation approach is being implemented. And we can see that data, it's a very positive data which we have got. Trickle Up got into a program called Ford Foundation and CGAP, which was started in 2009, and after that we decided to work on graduation. So what is a graduation definition? The graduation approach uses the right mix of interventions offered in right sequence to help the extreme poor graduate from extreme poverty into a sustainable livelihood within a span of 24 months to 34 months. It depends on the community where you want to work. I'll just take 30 seconds because it's a very interesting topic. Trickle Up and PRADAN has recently started a program in Jharkhand called Ultra Poor Response Panchayat, where we are working to strengthen the Panchayati Raj system, building the capacity of PRI members so that they are sensitive towards the need of ultra poor, and we will ensure that these ultra poor communities are involved in the whole system, in the Gram Panchayat, and their voice is heard if we're talking about localization of SDG. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sushant. I'll move now to Ms. Smriti Sharan. Ms. Sharan, MORD has integrated an inclusion approach, and by focusing on specific sections of society which typically we found were getting left out of the SDG framework. So in that context, I'd like you to specifically talk about the work on ultra-poor and any reflections, and specifically the integration with women's collectives and any lessons, that broad directions also going forward.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Madhu. Madhu, let me just begin with a confession. When you just said that while you went through the literature and you did not get any specific answers, I felt elated. At least I'm not the only one outside who's still struggling for answers. So I feel less left out. So we are in it together. So as we're talking of localization of sustainable goals, I think the three cornerstones that we really look at is participatory planning, designing and implementation, and very, very continuous on-the-field monitoring. And the ultra-poor graduation approach works with all three. And that perhaps is the reason for its success. But before we talk of our experience, what I'd like to say was that when Government of India moved on the universal social mobilization pathway, it was driven by the fact that no one should really be left behind. So if we see our research and our data, even at the very earlier instances, the most backward blocks were what were first integrated. And going forward with that, when we also looked at the SECC data and the participatory identification process, all of that focused on either identifying through a community or an auto-inclusion, where there was a widowed household, where there were no male members, where there were single deprivation or 2 to 3 deprivations. All of that worked towards an inclusion. Our experience tells us that there is extreme vulnerability. And this vulnerability is so stark that perhaps that itself is a setback for them to get enrolled into the self-help group movement, because they don't even have the wherewithal to follow a routine or to follow a saving pattern or to even have enough for 2 square meals a day. So that perhaps pushes them back. So when we talk of an ultra-graduation approach, after we've identified and we've done the verification, it is extremely important to handhold them and then perhaps bring them into the fold gradually. In fact, the DNRLM program stands out for its flexibility. And that flexibility has more meaning when we talk about the ultra-poor approach, because we try to include all sorts of groups and cohorts, whether they have a capacity to save, whether they have a capacity to repay, whether it's a smaller group, it doesn't fit into the boxes of SHG or a VO or whatever, we still do it. And this is the only group where we also have a concept of grants. So we could give them something from a loan to a soft loan to a grant, but anything to kind of begin the journey with them. So there is the basic consumption grant that is given to them, and then we give them the big push investment. And our experience says that there is no size that fits all. It varies from state to state. So while Bihar Ajivika looked at the participatory model, in the other hand, Rajasthan, it was West Bengal, I think, that used an external agency for identifying the ultra-poor. The initial learning from these has been so encouraging that there are more states that are coming forward to us for having similar programs in their states. And as we talk, there are almost 6 states where either we've given them the approvals or we're in the process of just scrutinizing their proposals threadbare. So that was Rajasthan, where we did an external resource agency. As we talk, we have Meghalaya, which has come up with a very innovative proposal about abandoned single women, because that is a very stark social cultural trend there, and the state government wishes to work on that. In Tripura, we have PVTG groups which fled the ethnic violence and have come there. In Rajasthan, we have the Saharia community. In West Bengal, we have the Lodhas that were identified. But not to miss that this whole initiative, one of the pioneer people was Kerala ma'am with Kudumbashri, where they worked with the PVTG people. And that's where we learned that participatory identification and working very closely with the line ministries has made all the difference. Two very significant things that I have noticed, which works very well, is a very trained, dedicated cadre. We call them mentors, we call them coaches, you give them any name. But they are so firmly entrenched with that group that they know just about everything. Paise bachaye, jama kiye, kya kharida, what did you do with the grant that was given? And so we are so committed to having these mentors really tied to the communities that we have been training with our partners, people from the same cohort who can work with the group. And that is a very encouraging result. In fact, one of the panelists mentioned BRAC. We recently went to Bangladesh to see the same ultra-poor experience, and we went into an interior village in North Bangladesh. The coach who took us to that particular village, he even knew the cattle names by heart. So he said, ye kaisi hai, or Hema kaisi hai, or whatever. And he knew the size of the poultry, the number of hens she had, or chicks she had. He even remembered that पिछली बार तुमने यहाँ लौकी उगाई थी, अब की बार कुछ और उगाया है. That's the kind of a community participation and working that we're going forward. I know my time is up. I will just like to close on one very, very hopeful note that working with the ultra poor is an idea which has arrived on the scene, and there is no way that we cannot look at it. So a lot of partners are working with us together to stitch a common minimum program, so that no matter who is working, they work on the common minimum agenda that we have for working with the ultra poor, leaving no one behind as the government's mandate is. And hopefully in the very near future, we will be able to come up with some very enthusiastic news for all of you in the development sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Smriti ma'am. Really heartening to know that, this agenda is kind of gaining more, accelerated this thing within the SRLMs. And yeah, moving on to Hyun Hee. Hyun Hee, children, particularly, those born in households with multi-dimensional poverty are kind of a big chunk of the individuals at risk. So what is, the global perspective also around children's poverty? And also, what is UNICEF's experience of working in the issue and the reflections from there?
Thank you. Namaskar. मेरा नाम hyun hee ban, Chief of Social Policy में UNICEF में काम करती हूँ. हिंदी थोड़ी बोलती हूँ. But I want to convince you, why focus on children and child poverty? Because as UNICEF, I'll just give you a little bit of global picture and local picture. The whole session is about localization of SDGs, local action. And currently, 44 indicators of the SDGs are actually related directly to children. And 2/3 of those are off track at the midpoint of the SDGs. So if you at grassroots level, and it was very heartening to hear references to Bal Sabha, Mahila Sabha, the child-friendly villages, woman-friendly villages, we need to focus on children. And children are SDG 1. You talked about the SDG starting point is 1, no poverty. And 1.2 actually recognizes explicitly the multidimensional nature of poverty for children. And they also talk about national definitions. And the 1.3, a few talked about social security. So in terms of effective policy measures, target 1.3 is actually about strengthening social protection systems and providing access to those vulnerable poor with social protection entitlement. 1.4 talks about basic social services, as well as technology and financial inclusion. 1.5, because climate change is a big threat. It does talk about community resilience to disasters and shocks, those related to climate-related extreme events. And then they also talk about gender and pro-poor policies and programs. And lastly, they talk about investing resources into eradication of poverty. So I just wanted to frame that because the SDG actually provides a blueprint for an effective policy at national, subnational level, down to the GP level. And just in terms of a global study, so 2023, there was a global study, poverty analysis done by the Oxford Policy, Poverty and Human Development Initiative, as well as UNDP. So they say that across 111 countries, 1.1 billion people are in poverty. And what's very, I don't think surprising, is that half of them are children, 566 million. And if you drill down in terms of who are the poorest in terms of age group, it's 0 to 9. So the younger the children, the poorer you are, multidimensional. Things like health, nutrition, education. And in it, they actually contribute 60% of the contribution to multidimensional poverty to 3 aspects: school attendance, years of schooling, and nutrition. So I think that this may resonate with you. But there is a silver lining because India is one of the 26 countries where they were able to have poverty rates in the last 25 years. So they have done grassroots level, national, subnational level. They have the, the SDG index. They've done a lot of LSDG initiatives. So they have many initiatives specifically looking at 2/3 of India's population who are in the rural development, rural area. And this has contributed to reducing poverty. But in terms of policy measures, I want to talk about the new face of poor children and families that UNICEF has talked about. So after COVID-19, so the new face, I would say, are poor and those that are resilient to poverty, or those now urban slum is growing. So that's a trend. Second is humanitarian and conflict situations. And third is informal sector. And the care issue is a very, very critical component that needs to be childcare, especially, that I want to highlight. And then lastly, because I only have 1 minute, effective policy measures, social protection. The government and at national state level have many social protection measures. We need to actually invest in social protection measures in the early years based on evidence. So we all know the science and evidence that if you invest in the early years, you actually generate the highest return on investment. And so it's good for children, it's good for women, it's good for families. It's actually good for economies because the high-income countries actually, there's a study done by UNICEF last year. They studied the pattern of spending and investment of 84 countries in high-income, middle-income, and low-income country. And they tend to backload the investment in the older children age group and youth, but actually they need to focus a lot more on the early years, things like early education, nutrition, water and sanitation that contributes to early childhood development, maternal health. These are things that will really break the intergenerational cycle of poverty. So in terms of policy measures, and then lastly, as UNICEF, time is up, okay. So what is UNICEF doing in India? We are supporting MOPR around a very important topic that many of you talked about, participation. So under the local LSDG initiative, we are supporting the government institutionalized Bal Sabha, Mahila Sabha, because we need to get down the priorities of the social sector and the GPDP that matters to children. We need to ensure fund flows to the sectors. And secondly, targeting the largest social protection programs in the world and in India, like the NREGA that you talked about under rural development, unlocking the potential of gender and child opportunities because they have a creche component. So we are working closely with MORD, but more. So in short, we need to design inclusive policies, programs that focus on children in order to achieve the SDGs. Lastly, people matter. We need to invest in participatory processes, and it really does make a difference. So thank you for that. Boho dhanyawad to PRADAN and Access Foundation and the government for giving UNICEF this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Hyun-hee. And I mean, even though one kind of guessed it, but it's really, I mean, these figures indicating that children is really kind of really very stark. And yeah, so thank you so much. And we move on to Mr. Matthew Cherian. Mr. Cherian, you've kind of spent decades working, on improving the, situation of the elderly in the country. And so just your, reflections from that work, and, what are the takeaways, challenges that remain, etc.
Thank you, PRADAN, and thank you, Madhu, for inviting me for this conference, Samagam. I will begin with the good news. The good news is all the people in the room will live to be beyond 80 years. And the women in the room will live another 4 years, 84 years. We are on the edge of a longevity revolution, and elderly will become a huge segment. And today it is 140 million. It will grow to be much higher. And if SDG 1 has to be tackled, we will have to tackle SDG 1, because the poorer, older women will be the largest segment, and single women. Of course, some panchayat leaders spoke about this, especially from West Bengal and from Karnataka. So I was hearing the presentation of the index, and there have been 9 themes, there have been 181 indicators, there's a child-friendly theme, there's a women-friendly theme, but there is no age-friendly theme. But what we did is, in Kerala, thanks to Isaac sir and Vijay Anand sir and Shailaja teacher, who was a minister, we introduced age-friendly panchayat in the villages. And of course, Kudumbashri, I don't know whether Sajit is here, but Kudumbashri also helped us in this effort. And we have been trying to convert the panchayats into an age-friendly panchayat. Because my state of Kerala has become an old state. We are more than 14% of Kerala is elderly. So this is something which you need to incorporate if you have to tackle SDG 1, which is the most important thing, because this will be the future of the poor. Now coming to the other area is, there was this panchayat leader, Ramesh, I think, from Karnataka, who was talking of pensions. I have been working on pensions for a long time, and I've been with the Ministry of Rural Development, which offers under the National Social NSAP scheme for older people, older widows, and disabled people, plus and also victims of terrorism. This is also what is given. But what is happening is, this scheme has been stuck at an extraordinary low level of 200 rupees per month, which is, I would say, it's a humiliation for the elderly to give a pension of 200 rupees, of course, we took it to the court. I have been made the amicus curiae in the case in the Supreme Court, and we are saying that there should be a universal pension. And unless we have a universal pension, there will be no improvement of the older people in this country, and also widows. In the same case, we are also tackling the widows of Vrindavan, Haridwar and Kashi, which are the worst widows. Of course, I have no capacity to reform Hinduism, and why does Hinduism discriminate against widows? And I think today it will become a very hot agenda if I do that. But we have been trying to say, at least provide them the pension, provide them financial security, and so that you can have that. Because under Article 14, Article 32 and 21, they have a fundamental right to a universal pension. And if we cannot get a universal pension or a universal health care, the lives of people in panchayats will be miserable. Of course, this has been heard by the Rajasthan government, and the Rajasthan government has also studied the Kerala model and started going to do age-friendly panchayats in Rajasthan, and have also introduced a universal pension of 500 rupees for all the elderly. It may not be a huge sum, but at least within the state government revenues, they are able to provide a universal pension. So my plea is to this august audience is, when you're considering LSDGs, etc., please do not forget older people. If you want to leave no one behind, you are now leaving the older people behind in whatever planning you have done. So try to include it. Barring 2 states, Kerala and Rajasthan, which I've included to some extent, we would need to. And then pension to widows is a big issue, and in every village where I go, the widows are saying we do not get it because some government at center or state has capped the amount of pensions which can be given to single women.
Yeah.
And of course, Smriti Sharan is here. Maybe you can look at it. Why is this cap there? Is it whenever demographic explosion is happening, how can you put a cap on single women? And so this is something which needs to be corrected. And if you don't correct it, you will leave older people behind.
Thank you, Charanji, and we'll also have maybe looking at the time, maybe another round, so we can probably take some of the questions that you that are coming up, not only in Mr. Charan's sitting, but also others. Yeah. So coming to Ranu now. Ranu, after your long stint of working on poverty alleviation, issues of multidimensional poverty, you are now involved in conducting a research on understanding the work that is happening on ameliorating ultra poverty. So early discussion, early observations, insights from that study, and what needs to be strengthened and lessons for all of us.
Thanks, Madhu, and it's always a pleasure to come for any event that's organized by PRADAN, its family. Firstly, because I think Sushant had set the ground on, so I'm studying graduation approach particularly, and my affair with ultra-poor study goes back to actually 2013, 2012. And I also remember going through the NRLM booklets, and poorest of poor was identified as a category. And it was Kudumbashri and SERP, the Telangana Society for Elimination of Rural Poverty programs, that had taken it up very seriously. And also, I think, Tamil Nadu. And I had documented these experiences in a policy brief I had written in 2014 for the Access Development Services Livelihood. And I was looking at that, and I think a lot of it is still relevant. So the way I'm looking at it now, this particular study that I'm doing, I have specifically looked at Bihar and Jharkhand, and I have looked at the NGOs that have been involved in conducting ultra-poor programs, that is Trickle Up, Bandhan Konagar, and very briefly Nudge, because they are new entrants in this field. So what I'm finding is, and of course some of you who watch the work of the livelihood missions, you would know that in August in Bihar, Jivika, they released something called a playbook on Satat Jivika Uparjan Yojana, SJY, which is the ultra-poor program of the Bihar Jivika. So one needs to distinguish, firstly, again, I want to bring your attention. There's a very interesting research work done by two behavioral economists from Harvard and Princeton, and I've quoted them in my paper. The book they have written is called Scarcity. And they say that there are three things, behavioral aspects, that stand out about the very, very people who deal with scarcity. They also give examples of time poverty, and even people like you and me could be suffering from scarcity. But analyzing it for the ultra poor, so there is something called tunneling effect. So you tend to have very short time horizons, and therefore you're not able to even visualize or dream about a future that is possible. The second thing is about borrowing. Obviously, because given the state of poverty they live in, a lot of them work in the informal sector. They are migrant laborers. I've met PVTG communities recently when I traveled to Gumla, working as bricklane workers in Tripura and Tamil Nadu and Hyderabad, all over. I mean, they are not sitting in forests. I mean, when you say PVTG, you will feel, oh, they are sitting in forests. They are not. They are forced to migrate out because they don't have any livelihood options back in their villages. And they borrow, and they are eternally in debt. And we all know about the debt cycle. You'd never get out of it. And the third thing they suffer from is distraction. Because of stress, scarcity creates stress, and therefore they are not able to actually focus. And to ground any activity, we all know we have worked for years on livelihoods. We have worked with middle poor communities and relatively communities that are willing to make that effort. For ultra poor, because of these three behavioral characteristics, it is extremely difficult for them to, get out of that trap. And therefore, they continue to work in exploitative labor arrangements. They migrate. They somehow make do and live by. And that's where I'm glad, Smriti ji, you brought out this point about the critical role of the community resource person or the master resource person. Some people call it the change makers. I think that's a very, very critical note. So one of my early observations looking at the scaling up. So, another point I want to highlight is that when an NGO implements the program, there is a lot of intensive work. We all know that. The whole system is geared to delivering a program. The moment you take it to a government system trying to scale it up, and like in Bihar, the first number they needed to reach was 1 lakh. And now I think they have upped it to probably 2 lakhs or whatever. Now the scale itself introduces very different kinds of challenges. And this MRP or the change maker who has to work intensively providing mentoring, counseling, handholding support is expected to do, if you go through the playbook, I listed about 11, 12 tasks that are expected. The MRP is normally a class 10 pass, usually women, in some places men. And I really felt that the system is expecting too much out of the MRP. So wherever the NGO technical support organization is present, they are able to give a backup support to the MRP, and a lot of things get done as a result. But I'm just trying to imagine the moment it will move, or it moves to the government delivery system. And I know in Bihar, for instance, it's one of the tasks that their social development team is supposed to do. It's not a dedicated vertical. So what I'm arguing in my paper is that to work with the ultra poor, you actually need a dedicated vertical, right, in the system, and not distract them with 5 other things that they have to do. The success of NGO pilots is precisely because there is a dedicated vertical. The change maker or the MRP needs also constant handholding. It's wrong to assume that you train them in 5 modules and few refresher courses and they are fine on their own. There are daily challenges. We have all worked on ground, and when we work with human beings and with such a challenging group of people, there are daily challenges, disappointments, demotivation, you give up. The attrition rate is very high amongst the MRPs. So I think that is something that needs to be kept in mind, that how do you create a system that continues to provide them support, motivates them, so that they in turn can continue to provide that kind of support, that intensive kind of support that is required for the ultra-poor household. The second thought that has come to me, and I've talked to a lot of people in both the states, is that because the moment you move into a scaled-up government program, the flow of funds, timely flow of funds, cash transfers, timely asset transfers have become very critical. It's a beautiful system that SRLM has worked out. Everything comes through the village organization structure. There is little scope for leakages. All that is very good, but there are huge delays. So what happens if you imagine an MRP who has motivated an ultra-poor household to take up an activity, and they are now ready to get started, but the asset is not coming. And timeliness is very critical because they are very vulnerable. So you don't get things in time, they'll migrate again. And that's the end of all the effort and it takes about 6 to 8 months to actually motivate them to even come on board because they don't trust you. I mean, that's another thing we have all learned is rural communities, especially poor, don't trust outsiders. They have been cheated so often that they think that, oh, you are just telling us stories and we don't believe you. We'll go back with the Sardar who will take us to Tripura, at least we'll get food to eat. They may not get much money to bring back home, but that's the real story. So timely flow of funds is extremely critical. A motivation of cadre, I've already talked, a dedicated vertical. I think the program duration is another thing that needs to be kept in mind. This thing about magic bullet of 24 months, 36 months does not really happen in practice, real life, because in none of the programs I talk to, the NGOs and the government system, after the graduation is done, except Trickle Up is now doing some work on that, nobody looks back and sees what happens, what has happened to those graduated households. After 2 years, have they continued? Because just giving a few goats is not going to give you a sustained livelihood. You need probably a diversified portfolio of livelihoods to be able to survive. So, tracking these graduated households is also very critical. Is there a dropout? Is there a slip back? What else needs to be done with them? Is my time up?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I mean, I have lots more to share, but then you can read
maybe, we can have a second round if time permits, So lastly, coming on to Shada. So Shada, hoping to listen from you on the Ashray program through Kudumbashree, and then a more recent effort of 14 lakh enumeration resulting into some 64,000. And of course, when it's Kerala, we all hope to, also listen to all the experiences of localization.
Thank you for the opportunity. If you look at Ashraya, the experience of Kerala through the Ashraya program is about 19 years old now. So we've been trying to target that very difficult segment of the destitute for rehabilitation for quite some time. There have been a lot of experiences, both good and bad, that have come out of Ashraya. There is also, right now, the NITI Aayog says that the multidimensional poverty in Kerala is 0.55%. So obviously, somewhere down the line, we have been doing a good job in handling poverty. But this also means that we are now looking at that last mile. And the last mile is very often the hardest to handle. So who are these people in the context of Kerala? And I've got to say that it's in the context of Kerala. In the context of Kerala, these are people who don't matter. They don't matter to they are invisible to the state, they are invisible to the local government, they are invisible to their communities. So finding them, locating them is therefore the first and most important and very critical thing to do. When we do surveys, they are the ones who get left out of surveys. They just don't, you just don't count them. So, which means that we really need a new methodology of being able to find these very critically ultra poor, the extremely poor. So for us, when we already have a group of 2.5 lakh people who are in Ashraya, but who are these people who still were out of the system was something that is very important to find. And we thought that we should not go the regular survey. We should find a much more nuanced and a process by which we could also get the local governments to own up to them. Because it is very important. These are people who are irrelevant to the entire system. So how do you get the local government to own up to them? Because you are also talking about bringing in a huge element of resources which would be in targeting just them. Those would be resources that could be taken by the poor, the near poor, the moderately poor, who would be in a much better place to actually seek those resources. So that was a challenge. And we did try out this thing that maybe we can get the local communities themselves to identify the poor. And how would you do that? Could we task them with the responsibility of identifying the poorest of the poor in their midst? Could we task them with the responsibility of saying that, yes, this person is poorer than me, or poorer than the person that I know? Could we get the local governments to own that up? Was a question. And that obviously also meant that we had to come up with a template of identification of questions, which was something that communities would understand. And that communities would also not misinterpret, because it would be very easy to misinterpret it in a way that suits you. So how do you get past that? Which meant that we first came up with the set of indicators that were looked at critical leading to critical indicators to poverty and not so critical indicators of poverty, made a combination of these, and then did the trial testing on the ground. So much so that ultimately so this was looking at health, it was looking at nutrition, it was looking at food deprivation, also looked at asset and lack of amenities as a next step. So these were the critical things that we looked at. And these qualitative indicators, after multiple iterations, had to go through FGDs. And the FGDs itself required a lot of focus in terms of iteration, again, to ensure that the communities got this right. Finally, we had 14 lakh people across the state coming out with a list of 64,006 families. And through this, we also had a fair idea of what was leading to their poverty. And from that, this, it was multiple deprivations that we needed to tackle. And so that meant that you had, for every single family that was identified, micro plans for the family had to be developed. So this was another additional exercise that was done over the identification. And after this the next question was, can we get into, first of all, making them visible, which meant they needed their voter cards, their Aadhaar, their bank accounts, the social security pensions, ration cards, etc. So getting those entitlements across, because we knew exactly who needed what. The next was also about finding out projects, looking at ensuring their health, nutrition needs were taken care of. Some of these people, and many of these people are people for whom we need to, we would look at care till the end of their lives. It is not as if they could be rehabilitated. And that is important to know, because when you're looking at ultra poor, sometimes that's all you can do. And you have a family of people who are mentally ill, with very severe illness. All you can do is look at how is it that you can take care of them. So this was something, and let's end with this last point, a couple of last points. One is the fact that this cannot be done by the local government alone. It requires government. It requires the state also to intervene. And this is what we've been trying here. We have all the departments who are involved actually taking responsibility and tracking what is going. So local governments provide the data, but then the responsibility is vested with the departments. And the state, at the state level, this is being tracked at the highest level by the Chief Minister himself. And where does the community come in? The community is also coming in as a monitor who is reporting as to whether all these entitlements and support that we are talking about, are they institutionalized? Is it regularly going? Are we slipping anywhere? And that is where the communities are now coming in, because one lesson that we learned from Ashriya was that sometimes, over time, what happens is you leave it to the community to take on that burden. And that's not done. It's the responsibility of the state.
Thank you, Sharda. So we've all been kind of very good and have so we are still left with what, some 3-4 minutes, Saroj? No, 3 minutes. So any thoughts that are triggered, etc., open, remarks anyone wants to make? Yeah, Ranu.
So working with ultra poor is time consuming, HR intensive, and needs money. And I think in the desire to reach large numbers, we have shortened the time span. We give huge numbers to each MRP to manage, which is at times not very practical. And as a result, you end up diluting the approach and the program. So I think both donors and government needs to recognize this, that you need to commit dedicated human and financial resources, get the money and put it for this. As a special, you have a special vehicle, also a special program. So that's one point I definitely wanted to make. And the second is about convergence, and we are talking of LSDGs and localizing SDGs. And this whole business of ministries and departments must come and work together. And as you rightly said, Shardaji, that you know, ultimately it's the responsibility of the government to ensure. So unless, and this only SRLM cannot ensure it. So how do we ensure that the other schemes, programs, entitlements reach the ultra poor? I know the MRPs are supposed to get them to fill forms, but just filling forms is not enough. You know, so there's a lot more work that is required. Okay. I have many more points, but I'll be
I guess. Smriti ji.
So I just quickly add to what Madam Ranu just said. So all of your points are absolutely well taken, and which is why we try to use a saturation approach, and the whole conversation that we do is across convergence with all the line ministries. So I guess we are on that path, but the numbers are so daunting that it would take time. And as you rightly said, we do have a fund under the Innovation Fund, which we are trying to use. Of course, we've submitted a white paper to NITI Aayog, and other things remaining the same as and when we get our approval, we'll probably scale it up in terms of finances.
Great. Yes. Shata.
So the beauty of NRLM is that it universalizes so the people approach, and because of that you don't have there is nobody who really feels left out. But when we say nobody, it is that nobody who actually has access or can have access. It is still critical to be able, you know, in the when we're looking at the poorest of the poor, to be able to target. And that targeting is going to be extremely difficult, because until the larger community feels its level of comfort of having access to resources, it is not going to let the poorest amongst them to obtain the resources. So that's always going to be a big challenge.
Great. Yeah, so, So thank you so much to all the panelists. I can't even, you know, begin to summarize, but, you know, broadly to say that, you know, I mean, there are approaches which kind of focus on, which are SRLM driven, but, you know, looking at the complexity and the diversity of the people in the ultra poor segment, which, you know, as you said, children comprise a large section, the elderly comprise another significant chunk, and single women. So again, you know, there needs to be, I think, a whole of society, a whole of government approach, and also, you know, deeply, strongly anchored by decentralized, local, bottom-up approaches. So that's my high-level takeaway for the panel. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, panel speakers and Madhu. And before we end this session, we, on behalf of Axis Bank Foundation and PRADAN, we would like to felicitate the guests. So for that, I would like to invite Isha on stage. Please join. Yeah, sure.